We turn now to the latest on the Trump Organization indictment and new questions surrounding the former president's children. New analysis of the indictment shedding light on more Trump Organization companies that could be in legal peril. The Daily Beast reporting that seven Trump Organization companies exhibit a, quote, pattern of paying a substantial portion of year-end bonuses to Weisselberg and other executives as if they weren't employees. And the prosecutors also claim the company's executives knew the practice was wrong. And at one of those companies, Ivanka Trump held an executive role for 8 years, adding context to these statements by Mary Trump that Ivanka may be the next to flip.
There will be other people who might be more willing to flip than Alan. And I think among those might well indeed be my cousins.
Oh, interesting. Like the Trump kids?
Ivanka also received, I don't remember the amount,
yes,
but hundreds of thousands
money.
of dollars in quote unquote right, consulting fees. That's not a thing. You're either an employee or you're not an employee. So I think we're going to find a lot more of that kind of thing going on. And she's much less likely to stay loyal than Alan Weisselberg.
Joining me now is Daily Beast political reporter Roger Sollenberger. He wrote that Trump article about Trump's 7 other companies, and former New York Assistant Attorney General Tristan Snell, who prosecuted the Trump University case. Thanks so much. Roger, I'm going to start with you. So this is what I think is key in your great article from Daily Beast. So Ivanka was in charge of one of these companies for 8 years. She was in a key executive role. What are the chances that massive bonuses could be handed out to executives at the end of the year that don't seem to square with finances and she wouldn't know? Because that's what this boils down to. She's going to claim she didn't know, or maybe she's going to say that they were grabbing her laundry for her or something else like that. But what are the chances that she could claim complete ignorance to those kinds of payouts at the end of every year?
That I actually can't answer because I have really no idea. But what I can tell you is that it's pretty likely that they're going to, plead ignorance, right? Take the ostrich defense, say their heads were in the sand, that they were not involved with the day-to-day calls, the actual dispensation of the salaries, whatever like that. But what we also know is that Ivanka Trump was listed as an executive on this company and on dozens of companies. And the Trump Organization, they tried to sort of blur the lines. She says, we don't care about titles. We're not big on titles. She said that in a 2016 deposition. She said earlier this year, apparently, that she didn't quite know what Alan Weisselberg's role was with the company. So you can sort of see that they're sort of paving that road. But, it remains to be seen what they would actually say if they were indicted or questioned by investigators in this case.
So, Tristan, you prosecuted Trump on the Trump University case. And here's the thing. My understanding of a lot of this is that part of the shell game, the house of cards that Trump often does in his businesses and even in his organization is he give a bunch of people a bunch of different titles so they can get paid 5 ways even if they're not showing up, right? Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, Tristan, is it possible that that's what was happening with Ivanka companies and was collecting paychecks from lots of locations that she wasn't in? And if that's the case, is that similar to kind of how Trump was running Trump University?
Very much so. I mean, the key is that the Trump Organization is the holding company, right? And then there are about 200 or 300 LLCs that are all these subsidiaries. Each one runs a particular business. So the ones that were identified in the indictment and that Roger wrote about, those are all LLCs, each of which managed one property or one business, and then had, at most a couple hundred employees in each of those businesses. So each of these things was basically treated as just another division of the Trump Organization, even though it was supposed to technically be a separate company. And we actually got a ruling in the Trump University case. We sued the Trump Organization and we sued Donald Trump in our case. And we did get an intermediate ruling in that case that said that the Trump Organization and Donald Trump were liable for Trump University's misdeeds. So that even though Trump University was broke, Trump Org and Donald Trump were still going to have to pay up personally.
So what you're saying in say layman's terms is imagine like a McDonald's but they have a separate burger company and a separate fries company and a separate McNuggets company, but they're all pretty much just handing around the same finances, whatever, so they can't get caught. That's more or less how he tries to set these things up.
Well, yeah, the kicker there is, why does he set it up this way? It's so that one of the businesses, and this happened with Trump U, could go under, and then they could just be like, well, that went under, so we're not going to pay that thing's expenses or even valid debts anymore. But to bring it back to Ivanka, the kicker is, it's not necessarily a problem if she's getting paid by a bunch of these different entities. The problem is that she was an employee and then also getting money as an independent contractor so that the Trump organization could avoid paying payroll taxes on all of that employee comp. That's the problem here, is the tax evasion that went on here. And it was clear that it was rampant throughout the company for well over a decade, and that it happened with Weisselberg. It probably happened with Jeff McConney, who we all believe now to be an unindicted co-conspirator number one. And then the question is Ivanka one of those other executives?
So, Roger, I want to go back to this. You know, Tristan just mentioned Trump does pay for things. This is how they pay for folks. I want to play you just some quick audio of Don Jr. talking about the generosity of his father, and I guess trying to set the stage for, he was trying to put his kids to work and trying to help people out as opposed to hide money. We'll get your thoughts on the other side.
My father, after almost 50 years of employment, paid for his grandkids' private school in New York City. My dad did that because he's a good guy, takes care of his employees.
I don't know if that's from Cameo or OnlyFans. I don't know why Don does these kinds of videos, but I got to ask you, Roger, like, you know, is that a real defense? Like, can you basically say my grandpa was nice enough to pay for his kid's school and that explains how he pays for employees? Like, who is Don Jr. talking to when he makes these sorts of defenses?
Well, I mean, just being generous doesn't mean that you didn't commit a crime in the name of generosity, right? So what we do have here is what you could perhaps classify as generosity, but what prosecutors say is a crime. And what we see with the bonuses, which is what my report is about at the Daily Beast, that those bonuses appear to have been improperly paid out to these employees. And we know Weisselberg for sure, right? But on the other side, we have the company's responsibilities for this, and they would be shirking their tax duties. And so, yeah, you could say an end of the year bonus, yeah, great job, you're being generous, you gave a hefty bonus, but how did you give that bonus? And why did you choose this method that is, improper? They said the companies knew it was improper. The prosecutors also say in the indictment, this is key, that it was a practice across the Trump organization. And then they named 7 of those companies. They named them. They didn't have to do that. They didn't name all of the companies. They said there were others too, but they named 7. And one of those companies does have Ivanka as a vice president. The others also have different connections to the Trump kids. And we already know that, from New York Times reporting last year, that Ivanka did take consultant fees when she was not an employee, or the Times reported that. And so if we see this practice across the board, this new company is different from the New York Times report. It's connected to a hotel, just like the Times was, right? The Times reports was, but this is a different company. And the setup, could be similar. We don't know.
If you're seeing the same pattern across 7 different companies, that's not just smoke, that's fire, that's a tornado, that's everything. Roger Sollenberger, Tristan Snell, thank you guys so much for your time this evening.